going to be talking about biogeochemical cycles. We're going to first start off with the hydrologic cycle or the water cycle. So key components of the water cycle that you need to know are: one, we have bodies of water on the planet, oceans, ponds, lakes, rivers, where the sun beats down on that water and causes it to evaporate. So you have evaporation, and then that water that evaporates will condensate, forming clouds. Then the clouds precipitate. And that precipitation could be rain, snow, hail, that sort of thing. That's kind of the main components of our water cycle, but there are some other things that we do have to be concerned of. One is plants. Plants are going to uptake water into their root system and feed themselves some water, so you have plant uptake. Then in the plant, in the tube that carries the water, there's a continuous line of water from the root all the way to the leaf. And then on that leaf, there's a little hole, and water will leave out that hole and then evaporate off. That is called transpiration. So transpiration is the evaporation of water from plant leaves. Then we have runoff. So when water hits an impervious surface, basically it can't soak through the surface, or too much water hits a surface and can't sink in, it's going to run off. And then it usually is going to go downhill into whatever puddle or body of water it can, lead to. So you have runoff. And then you have infiltration. Underneath the surface of the earth, we have rock, but then water will seep down into what we call underground aquifers. There's a couple different types of aquifers, and we will talk about that a little bit later on in the course. This is a very, very, very slow process that happens. So infiltration does occur. Water seeps down into the earth, and it might hit into one of these aquifers. It might not, depending on the type of aquifer it is. Whenever we are looking at one of these cycles, one of the things that we need to keep in mind is, how do humans interact with the cycle? How do we disrupt it? A lot of the questions on your AP exam are going to be dealing with how do we disrupt all of these different processes. So a couple things that we need to think about with the water cycle is, one, diverting water. Whenever we put up a dam in a riverway, it diverts the water. It's going to slow down the water that is moving to the areas that were below the area. It's going to flood the area above the dam, displacing organisms above the dam. So we do have to keep in mind how we are diverting and changing water. If we are pulling water from a waterway, that's also diverting water through a tube, in a pipe, to our municipal service. Another thing is harvesting of trees. Like I said, we look at transpiration, the evaporation of water from plant leaves. When we harvest trees and we take down a lot of trees, we're now removing water uptake from that area. We reduce evaporative transpiration. We increase the amount of runoff because the plants or the trees are not there to uptake the water, and the water will just keep on going, which will increase erosion. So all things that we need to think about with the water cycle. And now let's take a look at the carbon cycle. With the carbon cycle, the main reactions that happen in nature for the carbon cycle is that there's naturally carbon dioxide in the air. We also put more up there, but trees will take in carbon dioxide through photosynthesis. Then there is the release of CO2 by respiration. Trees also do this. So we have that cycling of carbon from photosynthesis to cellular respiration, which we talked about before. Whenever you have combustion, basically burning anything, this is my little fire here, you're releasing CO2 and other carbon molecules into the atmosphere. So we might be combusting fossil fuels. So here we have more combustion. In order to get our fossil fuels, we need to extract our fossil fuels. So we have a carbon extraction from fossil fuels. Also, when you're gardening or farming and tilling the land, you're releasing carbon from the soil as well when you're tilling. So there's that. And just a quick note about fossil fuels. Coal, oil, and natural gas come from organisms, mainly plants, from before the time of the dinosaurs. So dinosaurs actually were not fossil fuels. They're too new of organisms to have been fossil fuels. So fossil fuels are organisms before the time of the dinosaurs. We have volcanic eruption. That is releasing carbon dioxide and methanes into the atmosphere, and just methane is CH4. So it's just another carbon product here. We have organisms that are eating carbon molecules. They're also releasing carbon molecules in their gas and having large feedlots, basically large amount of farm animals in one area has been causing a problem with too much methane release. And then you also have decay. So any organism that dies, whether it be an animal or a plant, it's going to start decaying and returning carbon back into the soil. And as you can see, that the carbon released to the atmosphere is a lot more. There's a lot more arrows going up into the atmosphere than that are pulling the carbon out of the atmosphere. So this is one of the things of why we need to be cognizant of how much carbon we are putting into the atmosphere, because there are so many more arrows going up than there are pulling out of the atmosphere. There are many ways that humans disrupt the carbon cycle. Combustion is probably one of the biggest ones here. The removal of fossil fuels, some of our farming practices are all disrupting the carbon cycle. Let's take a look at the nitrogen cycle. Nitrogen transforms mostly with the help of bacteria. Bacteria are the ones that are generally changing the form of different forms of nitrogen availability. In the atmosphere, we have nitrogen gas. Bacteria that live in the soil and with special plants called legumes, and legumes are things like peas and beans, that sort of thing. There's bacteria that live at the nodules of the roots that will do the nitrogen fixation. So we have nitrogen fixation. And what that's going to do is we're going to turn the nitrogen gas into ammonia. And then the plant can assimilate it, basically take it into their own self and utilize that ammonia. They can't use nitrogen gas, so the bacteria fix it. They change it into the form of NH4, ammonia, and the plant can then uptake it and use it for their nitrogen purposes. Then you have other bacteria that do nitrification. And these bacteria are essentially taking our ammonia and shifting it into nitrates and nitrites. Again, plants can utilize the nitrates and nitrites. And then this is generally happening in the soil. Then we have denitrification bacteria. That takes the nitrates and the nitrites and puts it back up into the atmosphere as nitrogen. So our main processes are nitrogen fixation, where we're taking nitrogen gas and turning it into ammonia. We have nitrification, taking the ammonia and turning it into nitrates and nitrites. Then we are then taking those nitrates and nitrites, denitrificating them, and returning them as nitrogen back into the atmosphere. So other places that we get nitrogen cycling is we have this animal that's going to get the nitrogen from the plant source, and then your nitrogen waste. So urine is our nitrogen waste, which will then go back into the system and be returned. There are a few different types of nitrogen waste products depending on the type of organism you are. Most mammals have urea in their urine as their nitrogen. Some organisms have uric acid, and then a lot of organisms that live in waterways have ammonia, because the ammonia can be diluted by the water around them. If we were to produce ammonia, it'd be too toxic to our systems, so we bind that nitrogen up in urea. So there is the nitrogen cycle. So the ways that humans disrupt the nitrogen cycle would be, one way that humans disrupt the nitrogen cycle is the use of fertilizers. Fertilizers are applied to a numerous amount of crops, our grasses, that sort of thing, and contain a lot of nitrogen, as most plants will need it, especially if it's a monocrop where that kind of grass doesn't have the bacteria living at the nodules giving them the nitrogen through the nitrogen fixation. So we need to add in extra nitrogen in order to keep the nitrogen available for a nice green grass. And then with runoff, when it rains, the excess nitrogen is then carried off into the runoff and then brought into the waterways. And when you put a large amount of nitrogen into our waterways, it can cause algae blooms. An algae bloom is basically if you look at a pond, like a still area of water, and it's got this green scum on the top, that is basically an algae bloom. And what happens is that it keeps the light from going into the pond. And then when that happens, the plant material that's in the pond can no longer get the light that it needs for photosynthesis. And if it can't get the light for photosynthesis, they die and they start decaying. And then without those plants, we now no longer have a good source of oxygen into the water. And because we're losing the photosynthesis from those plants, so there's less dissolved oxygen in the water, thus killing off any of the animals that are in there. So if there were fish or frogs or that sort of thing living in the water, you're no longer going to have oxygen for those organisms to survive, and they will start dying off. This is called eutrophication. It's another thing that we'll be going over more throughout this course. Let's talk a little bit about the phosphorus cycle. The phosphorus cycle does not cycle through the atmosphere. It solely cycles through the soil and waterways, mostly leaching from rocks and that sort of thing. You mostly have assimilation organisms taking phosphorus from the environment, mineralization, and then sedimentation. So it's very, very slowly cycling. How humans disrupt the phosphorus cycle. One is with mining, and there's a whole host of disruptions that happen from mining. Again, with fertilizers, phosphorus is a main component of many fertilizers. So just like what happens with the nitrogen, phosphorus does the same thing. Though phosphorus can cause a big foamy material to occur on top of the water if the water is churning and moving. In one way that you have to be careful with phosphorus is in a lot of the salts that are used to de-ice roads in the wintertime. And so with the runoff, collecting the phosphorus from the salts brings it into the waterways, and then if the water is moving, it can cause a big foam on top of the waterway, again blocking light for any plant material that's in the waterway. There used to be a lot of phosphorus in household detergents. In the 1990s, phosphorus was taken out of many laundry detergents. And by 1994, more than 16 states banned phosphorus from laundry soap. And then in the early 2000s, it was then removed from dishwashing soap. Many more states began to ban phosphorus in soaps as well. The EU banned phosphates in soaps in 2013. Another place that we see a lot of phosphorus is in the Everglades. Another disruption with the phosphorus cycle was in the Everglades. There was an increase of phosphorus output from various reasons, soaps, and also from phosphorus mining in Florida. The ecosystem in the Everglades saw an increase in cattails, which are the plants that have that big brown kind of cat-look tail. So this is a brown color here, and they're kind of on green reed stalks. There was an increase in the cattails, which killed out a lot of the native sawgrass and changed the landscape of the Everglades and reducing habitats for native organisms that lived there. Anywhere that you do see an increase or a lot of these cattails, you know that there's a lot of phosphorus in that area. In some places, it's not necessarily a bad thing. It's just that if you see a lot of these, you could think that there is a lot of phosphorus in that area. So there's been many other biogeochemical cycles that we could talk about: calcium, magnesium, sulfur. They all have some sort of cycle movement throughout our ecosystems. One of the big things that we need to keep in mind is how us as humans disrupt, add in, take out any of these key components of our ecosystems. Alrighty, that was Biogeochemical Cycles. Thank you for watching.